serious family court laywers, what's the most petty behavior you've seen from parents? Story 1. Client once called me with an emergency. The emergency was that his soon-to-be ex-wife fed the kid Chef Boyardee for dinner. I went to law school for this. Story 2. The interim court order said that my client, the mom, was not to discuss the court proceedings with the child. During an access visit, the child asked her, "When will I get to see you again?" And my client responded, "We'll have to see, but hopefully soon." The father then argued that this was discussing the court proceedings with the child and tried using it as an excuse to deny any further access. Story 3. In law school, I did some intern work for a family law clinic. Most of my clients were pretty reasonable, but when waiting for my cases to be heard in the hearing room, I saw some really petty and terrible from other parties, but one case stood out as the worst. One guy who got custody of the family dog in the divorce said that if he didn't get more visitation with the children, he would have the dog euthanized. His excuse was that without the kids there, the dog wouldn't get the attention it needed and was better off dead. The ex-wife made an impassioned plea before the judge, showing pictures of the kids playing with the dog and video testimony from the kids expressing their love for it. It was 100% clear they would be devastated if the dog was put down. While the judge was very sympathetic and tried asking the ex-husband to be reasonable, in the end her hands were tied, since the dog was the ex-husband's property per the divorce agreement, and he was free to do whatever he wanted, provided it comported with state anti-cruelty laws. In the end, she relented to give him custody rights basically every weekend of the month in order to save the kid's dog. To the judge's credit, she gave the ex-husband a verbal haranguing like I've never seen in all my years of practicing law since. She warned him that she would be watching this case very closely and would not hesitate referring it to a criminal prosecutor if he slips up in any way, either towards the treatment of the dog or the kids. And that if anything happens to that dog, she would fast-track a hearing to revisit his visitation rights, and strongly implied the new visitation schedule would be vastly against his favor should that come to pass. On that day, I realized I never wanted to be a family lawyer. Edit TLDR, father threatens to kill family dog if he doesn't get weekend custody of the kids and wins custody in court. Story 4. As an intern, I saw a couple have long, hateful emails about who was going to keep a unisex Armani hoodie. Almost all of their discussions centered on that one hoodie. When in the end the husband got to keep it, the wife cut holes into it, which ruined it. It was pretty nice TBH. Story 5. Father wanted full custody of his child. Child was in full mother's custody. Child has diabetes. Both parents must fill a daily glucose intake measured by glucometer. Every time father dropped the child at mom's, he would buy a Snickers or Twix on the way there and feed it to the kid. Then we flipped out the glucose measurings during court. Due to the measurings being extremely high when the child was at mom's, we were able to get the child to the father's full custody. I didn't know what he was doing. I certainly didn't advise him to do it. He just brought it to the courthouse and ordered me to present it. Either that or that time, where during divorce a guy had exact knowledge of how many toilet paper sheets his wife was overusing and how many liters of warm water she overused. Story 6. Repeatedly taking the kids to CPS and trying to get them to accuse a teenager of rape. Every medical record makes it clear that the mother was the only one doing any talking. What's worse, she was a social worker trained to interview child victims professionally. Story 7. I'm just an intern, but I once was sifting through discovery that our client provided as he was trying to win custody over his son. One of these pieces of discovery was a detailed account of the mother's timeliness. Basically, if the mother was late to pick up her son, they would time it and document it, which would make sense if it was significant, but I'm not exaggerating. Over a 6-month period, she was late for a total of 33 minutes. Seeing as they met to exchange the child 3 times a week, it means she was late by about 1 or 2 minutes once a week. It was the most insignificant piece of data that I have ever seen in my entire life. But the client was adamant that we use it in court to prove that the mother was irresponsible. Story 8. The worst I was ever a part of in California. We have certain requirements to meet before one parent can move away with the child. These requirements kick in when the other parent's visitation will be materially impacted by the move. My client is mom. She's a dental hygienist. She has kids with dentist 1 and divorces dad for dentist 2. She wants to move with the kids to dentist 2's town so she can work for him, live closer to work, etc. Dentist 2's town is a 25-minute drive away from Dentist 1's town, 25 minutes. Between the two of them, the two dentists must have spent nearly $400K fighting over a 25-minute move. This was also the moment I realized I made a terrible mistake becoming a lawyer when I should have become a dentist. Bonus saddest behavior. I have personally seen mom creating fake abuse stories and dropping hints to the pediatrician, in turn causing the pediatrician to call CPS about dad. All worked out in the end. Mom lost custody because of her actions after it all came out. Double bonus funniest thing I ever saw. Rich breadwinning wife refused to pay husband spousal support because those laws were written to protect housewives. He's not a housewife. This is insane. Story 9. Family law legal assistant. Here, a client of ours included a chunk of in the freezer in her list of assets that she insisted she get back. The lawyer on the other side came back with respectfully and not going to argue over secondhand meat in a freezer. Story 10. I practice law. Not usually family law, but I have a case of my own right now. My grade school-age son took an entrance exam for a gifted student program. He's been offered a spot in the program, but it will require switching to a different school within the district next year if he joins. The program is well regarded in town. One person whose kids went through it described it to me as a quality private school education for free. I have to go to court in a few weeks to argue over whether our son should join the program. His mother, who signed him up for the test and called it the most important day of his life, has now decided he shouldn't join it. I don't know why. She's made some half-hearted arguments that he couldn't handle it, and that she'd have to do too much driving, but I suspect it's just because I'm in favor of it. This is getting me really down. It's a great opportunity for our son, and she just doesn't want to agree. Story 11. A mother actively coaching her 2 kids to say that dad was physically and abusive to them. She would have gotten away with it except for 2 things. 1. The court-appointed psych managed to catch these lies out in the interview-to-date longest report I have read at 280 pages. And 2. The oldest kid, then 10, I think got annoyed at the mother for some such reason and recorded her on their cell phone, which was promptly played for dad. In the end, dad got full day-to-day care, and mother had supervised contact for 6 months before she went to every second weekend. I just want to make clear that this is probably the worst case I have seen. In my experience, both males and females can be as nasty as each other making allegations. Sadly, the worst losers in this are always the children. Edit 2. Check some old notes on it. Mother had supervised contact for 13 months, not 6. Still not enough MO, but better than 6. Story 12. The ex-husband didn't want to pay what he owed his ex-wife. He thought he could her over by dragging on the process with appeals. He was not only hurting her, but also his children. She desperately needed the money, and he knew that him dragging the process caused her to lose her job and have to move back with her parents. But once he paid, she not only moved out, but bought a house. No, not just like applied for a loan and got a house. Straight out paid cash for a full house. In the end, he not only had to pay the full amount of what he owed, but child support, his lawyer fees, and her lawyer fees. Story 13. I may have written about this before on Reddit. For my first job as an attorney, I clerked for a state court of appeals. An appellate court reviews all manner of lower court decisions, including family law. Every single case that was sent to our court came with a case file that included all the actions that the trial court took in the course of a trial, a transcript of all court proceedings, and briefs by all concerned parties. And most often, you could immediately know what kind of case you were handling simply by the size thickness of that case file. Usually, criminal cases had the thinnest files, 2 to 3 inches thick a day, or 2 of trial transcript, short briefs by the defendant and the state, and approximately 10 to 15 motions. Civil cases were a little thicker, because the frequent use of expert testimony made the trial and transcripts longer, and the lack of a constitutional right to speedy trial in civil cases allowed many attorneys to use procedural law and motions in a coercive manner. So there was a lot of paperwork. Red Rainmaker. Usually, the parties' briefs included a few more issues than you'd find in a criminal case. Altogether, 5 to 6 inches thick, this was a death penalty state, and we did have many such cases. These were serious felonies, and trials took a couple of weeks, so very thick transcripts. Many required constitutional steps and required a separate trial for sentencing. These case files were maybe 12 to 15 inches thick. Then there were the divorce cases. Appeals are not mandated in divorce cases, so my court only saw those divorce cases where the fighting between the ex-spouses couldn't be resolved satisfactorily by the divorce court. In other words, at least one ex wanted another opinion chance at winning. These case files took up drawers. These case files were measured in feet, not inches. The largest files were those where children were involved. In other words, these people wouldn't co-parent, and so had to run back to the trial court for nearly every single disagreement: where and how to school, feed, clothe, practice religion, conduct extracurricular activities, etc., repeatedly renegotiating child support, repeatedly trying to change custody or visitation orders, trying to control how the other parent managed his or her time with the child. And every single one of these court proceedings cost money, lots of money. I handled one case where the father didn't want the mother to give the child multivitamins. Hundreds of dollars in attorney fees over a Flintstone chewable. These fights were really rarely about the kids. They were attempts to control the ex-spouse through the kids. And what these litigants never realized is that by refusing to co-parent, they essentially were giving over their parental role to the judge. In their efforts to control one another, they lost all power and control. Story 14, I have been in family law for over a decade, and the most petty thing I have ever seen happen was that the wife from an affluent divorcing family had several trees planted on one side of the fence on the property, and the husband wanted them planted on the other side of the exact same fence, about 5 feet from where the wife had them planted. He insisted that we file contempt against the wife for said tree plantings. They spent close to $50,000 in legal fees arguing over the stupid trees. It was incredulous. I have stories upon stories of people's pettiness, but this one will always stand out for me. Another really petty one was a dad buying a money order for child support every month, but not actually giving them to the mom. He gave us copies of all of the money orders he bought as evidence of the support he paid, but she claimed she had never received them. Well, that seems stupid, but no, he had actually just kept them, and then, like an idiot, gave the original month's old money order to the mom to pay for the outstanding child support balance. He was definitely found in contempt. People can be really ridiculous. Story 15, worked in an attorney's office for a little bit. Knew about a divorce case one of the attorneys was involved in where the child had been diagnosed with a terminal disease with maybe a few years left, and the parents try to fight over what the child's wish should be for one of those Make-A-Wish type of foundations. I do know the judge chewed both parents a new one when this issue came up, but ultimately could not make a call on how the wish would be granted. I believe the child ending up refusing the wish on account of the argument it caused between the parents. Just hearing about the details of this case me up for a while. Edit formatting. Story 16, am training to be a lawyer, but I have a case in my own family right now. Aunt and uncle are getting a divorce for various reasons. Uncle supposedly had an affair with a woman had been in a relationship with before marrying my aunt, him harassing and verbally physically abusing my aunt and her father, the granddad, who lives with them, scaring their 2 kids, and so on. The divorce is mutual, but the splitting up of assets, custody, etc. isn't. He's tried everything in his power to claim everything he can from my aunt, from bank accounts to the house they lived in. My aunt moved away and lives in pretty much the middle of nowhere with her family ATM to get away from it all. Uncle is acting like a lunatic. Aunt is frightened of him, and the kids are terrified. He's turned up at their school before demanding to see the kids. Is abusive and nasty. Even at court, he yelled that he didn't agree with what was going on at the last hearing and walked out. Judge didn't tolerate his bullshit and literally just went, well, too bad, I don't care what he thinks. He's accused my aunt of being an unfit mother because she's always at work. She's a doctor and has a really senior and prestigious position and travels often, but the court found she's fit enough. Then he tried to accuse the granddad of being unfit and dangerous as he's 72, on the basis that he has weak eyes or something, because he was involved in a car crash. He even accused the granddad of abusing his 7-year-old kid and insisted that both kids were born between the granddad and the aunt because they're too close. She's his daughter, of course, they're close. He's always been there for her, and now he takes care of her kids when she's at work. Just what kind of a person do you have to be to go there? The kids don't want to see him, but he has visitation under supervision. My female cousin, who is 11, cries when he is around, and last time, apparently on his last visit, locked herself in the toilet and didn't come out till he had left. My 7-year-old cousin keeps muttering, I want to kill him. Can you imagine how devastating it is to hear a kid say that? I'm not sure what's going on there at the moment, just that the process is ongoing and he has visitation every 2 weeks or something. He's petty and up and is trying to ruin any credibility my aunt and granddad have. It's petty and disgusting that he goes to such lengths and doesn't really give about his own kids. He can't see that they're terrified and hate him, and I can see how much it's affected them. They're really withdrawn unless they're with family members. How petty do you have to be to try and ruin the lives of your own kids? I think my aunt and granddad are trying to stop visitation, which is difficult as he's their father, but they're hoping social services can see what a train wreck this whole situation is and to not put the kids through this anymore. I think my granddad mentioned something about a psychologist. The fact that my cousins have to deal with this at their age is just horrifying. It's petty when parents are too busy trying to ruin each other and don't look at the effect it has on their children. Story 17, parents didn't let a kid get his college education because they were fighting over who was going to pay it. This includes co-signing on the predatory loans that everyone was rushing to sign up for. The judge asked why either one didn't bring this up 6 months earlier when they knew he was starting college. Both of them gave the same answer, except from their perspective. Something like the other parent is to blame because they didn't tell the parent about the bills. Apparently both knew about the bills and the deadlines for the previous 3 months and expected the other to pay for it. The case wasn't raised in court until after the deadline for the next semester had passed. The kid probably was forced to take loans on his own. God only knows his situation now. The parents ended up spending the same amount as the tuition each in lawyer fees, just for them both to have to pay half the tuition, never get divorced. Story 18, not really petty, but more psychotic. My dad received full custody and won everything in the divorce because my mom was diagnosed with a multitude of mental problems that she refused to take medication for. And she was an abusive alcoholic who also did meth for funsies. Anyways, after all that was said and done, she decided she'd show us. When we were gone, she'd break into the house and steal random like Tupperware lids. All the Tupperware lids. We came home from school and all the forks were gone. So we went to Walmart and bought forks. Came home with forks and all of the spoons were gone. We found out she'd been getting in through my bedroom window. So we put a lock on the window and put up security cameras. Didn't work out because 3 days later while we were gone, we got her on video stealing. Yes, actually stealing the window and running down the road. Before you ask, yes, we have a restraining order. Yes, we turned the tapes over to the cops. No, you can't have a crazy person put into a mental hospital against their will unless they're a physical threat to themselves or others. Yes, she still randomly steals stuff from my dad's house. It's more of an amusement now, though. You always decorate the tops of your cabinets with stuff and forget about it. So we play this game called What Used to Be There. Story 19, one guy was a total control freak. Had gone to the Philippines and romanced his now ex-wife. Brought her back to Australia and then expected her to be a slave for him, pop out his kids, etc., etc. When she left him, he manipulated her into believing that they would share care of the kids, and they didn't need court orders. Then behind her back, he went to court, obtained sole custody of the kids, and basically cut her out. Then when she was back on her feet and could finally go back to court and try to get her kids back, he said she was a prostitute, among other things. He said the kids were learning sexualized behavior from her, despite the fact that he was living in a trailer caravan modified shipping container, something like that, with no actual walls between the kids' room and the bedroom he shared with his new partner. And the mother was living in a house with bedrooms and doors. Real nice guy. In the end, he didn't use a lawyer, so he was completely steamrolled in court. His court documents were laughable. Literally everything that had ever gone wrong with the kids was the mother's fault. And he now sees the kids once a fortnight instead of having them live with him full time. So there's a way not to do things. Also, hilariously, one of the things he said in court was that he knew when he was impregnating the mother because he can control his right. Story 20, this happened in January. Guy was straight out of jail 2 years, and of course at that point, his marriage was rocky as when his wife dropped his kids off to visit, he lived with his parents for parole purposes. The son said his uncle hit him. The father then filed a PFA against the wife and uncle. It was granted. Then he files for sole custody. It was granted. The kids were in his custody for about 2 months before the custody hearing. Of course, my boss threw me the file, and I had to handle the mediation and last-minute prep. At mediation, the father and wife sit angry-eyed, literally, each cross-armed and furious. The other lawyer and I discuss the facts and what arrangement each client wants briefly in another room. We come out and our clients are gone, magically, and praise the Lord. In the course of 10 minutes of me and the lawyer talking, the father and mother made out in the corner of the hallway, and returned. The case was dropped. May I mention, this was pro bono, PA jurisdiction too. Story 21, AMA cop. Verified on her protect and serve, but prior to that I was a lawyer and clerk for a judge while in law school. I saw the following cases during that time. These are different cases. Parents had alternating weekends. Mother's Day fell on Dad's weekend, and Father's Day fell on Mom's weekend. Father decided Mom could have kids for Mother's Day, assuming she would allow him to have them on Father's Day. Well, they went home to Dad on Father's Day weekend, and Mom filed a contempt motion. Kids were getting old enough to decide which parent they would prefer to have primary custody throughout the year. Kids prefer Dad and wish to stay with him most of the time, especially through school year. In divorce decree, Mom was given sole authority over education choices, i.e., got to decide where kids went to school. She decided to send them to a boarding school out of state. Mom and Dad had shared parenting. Dad also worked as pilot, so had a regular schedule, and his schedule was usually picked 2 months in advance, so in July he would get September's schedule. So they would pick dates for shared custody 2 months out after Dad got his schedule. Well, scheduling changed, and now Dad would only get schedule 1 month out, so in July Dad got August schedule. It was several months' worth of litigation before that sorted out. As a cop, I see the following things regularly. One parent is allowed to pick up kids after school, so they have custody at, say, 3 p.m., but other parent is in charge during school day. So basically, other parent comes and picks up kid at 230 because they are permitted to do so. Then pickup time is 6 p.m. Parent is running late and arrives at 610. Parent refuses to hand over children because they are in violation of shared parenting agreement. Now, the one I see a lot with divorces involving police officers a lot is the other parent will file for emergency custody and protection because the other parent, who is a police officer, keeps guns in the house even if the only gun is the duty weapon. These motions often win early and take several months to resolve. In the meantime, one parent is only allowed supervised visitation away from his or her own home. Story 22. My first job out of law school was as a trial court staff attorney. This is basically a judicial law clerk, so we did a lot of research and advisory memos for judges. I didn't cover a family law docket, but my office mate did. She got an emergency motion in a family law case one time. For the non-lawyers, these are filed when something is extremely time-sensitive and critically like a matter of life and death important. If the judge deems it a true emergency, your matter will be heard on an expedited basis. They'll fast-track you in for a hearing, usually in a matter of days, rather than the usual weeks, months it normally takes to get a hearing date. Anyhow, this particular emergency motion was to compel the ex-spouse to send their child to Happy Faces Daycare, because if the child couldn't go to Happy Faces Daycare, it was going to be irreparably damaged from the lack of social exposure, etc. Emergency, Happy Faces Daycare, FML. Needless to say, this was not an emergency. I don't know how the motion was ultimately ruled on, other than that it wasn't an emergency. Story 23. When I was a kid and my parents were divorcing, my dad filed many lawsuits against my mother for anything and everything. When I was 10 years old, he even told me he was going to take me to court in a lawsuit because I didn't want to go visit him. Story 24. I've seen some pettiness, but the best story I have is actually from my guardian ad litem professor. When she was practicing, she had a client whose ex-wife was super duper about getting all of the children's clothes back from his house. When she got the kids back from him, like if one sock was left behind, all would break loose. So this guy's solution was to make the children strip naked in the foyer and put on clothes specifically worn at his place when it was his turn to have them. Then when they went back to mom's, they had to strip naked again and change back into the clothes she sent them therein. Story 25. $3,000 between me and another very good lawyer to argue about 13-month versus 30-month child support. They had $5,050 custody. The kid was 13. Even after I did the math for my client explaining they were paying me more than the difference for the entire rest of child support, they still wanted to do it. Story 26. A cousin of mine, let's call her T, to protect her, had a marriage and 3 kids, K, L, and I with a man I hated so much I think I've intentionally forgotten his name. So we'll call him F4. You can guess because of this story. Child number 3, I was born with serious issues that were luckily diagnosed and tended to quickly. She suffered no lasting damage but can't digest normal proteins. No meat for her. Medically, she has a tube in her stomach, and when younger, it had to be through her nose. This made I a pretty cranky baby and self-conscious toddler. In short, they split when she was 2 or 3, and this man, I use the term extremely loosely, petitioned for custody of the kids. Actually, just K and L. T could keep I. Thankfully, the judge ruled, as any of us would when he heard. Story 27. When I was in law school, I worked on a case involving the parents of a victim of Sandy Hook. They were divorced prior to losing their child, but were still fighting over child support several years later. They were fighting over who got to keep the victim's compensation fund proceeds for the death of their 6-year-old. They were insanely rich, so it wasn't about the money. It was about getting a win over their former spouse. It wasn't so much petty that they were fighting over it, but the way they were fighting over it, using the death of their baby to score points against that baby's other parent, and the other children were stuck in the middle of this show. Incredibly petty, but much more depressing than anything else. Worst case I've ever worked on. Story 28. As an intern in law school, I saw a case where the father was likely going to get an unfavorable custody and support arrangement, so he claimed the mother was unfit. His basis: she's into kinky and has a new boyfriend. He insisted on telling the court specifically what she likes in bed, even though he admitted that the children never saw or were subjected to any of these acts. He did it just to embarrass the mother. Story 29. Worked in a law firm dealing in family matters. Couple hammers out a separation agreement over months of meetings, mediation, letters, and drafts back and forth. Ended up having to take it to court because they couldn't agree on who would get the air miles. Story 30. When my parents divorced, I was 4 at the time. My dad told my mom he didn't want custody as long as he could keep their CD collection. That was until he realized how much he would have to pay in child support. He had me 2 days a week until I showed my court-appointed counselor how to tell if you had poured a full shot of whiskey. I don't have much memory of this, but he apparently would take me to happy hour at a local bar, then to pawn shops to look at guns. Full custody was given to my mom, who moved us out of state. I don't speak with him anymore. Story 31 Canadian family lawyer here. Many instances of pettiness. Generally, good family lawyers will call their client on their bullshit. We don't want to be the lawyer standing in front of the judge over really petty things. Reputation is important. Client, my son is very mature for his age. I believe access to his mother should be per his discretion. Your 2-year-old son. That said, I've had people call my office yelling that my client wouldn't allow them to pick up the infant child at 10 p.m. Only 4 hours late for a visit. One guy fired 2 previous lawyers and retained me to negotiate, adding 3 meaningless words to a settlement. We're talking months of intense negotiations between counsel. One parent refused to allow another parent to take kids on vacation because they wanted to take the child to Disney first, despite, not having the funds to do so. The most petty are the parents who phone CAS Child Protection Services or the police for every minor disagreement. Your 2-year-old cries when leaving your home. Call Child Protection Services. Story 32 Upon losing the house, because he literally locked my mom out of their bedroom, garage, home office, and shed, my dad decided the house only meant the brick. He took whatever appliances he could fit and, just for good measure, ripped the carpeting out of the bedroom. Or that he tried taking all of the family photos, including the ones of her relatives, without her notice. She only found them because he forgot to lock the office door, and I lied about locking it when he called to check. Couple had dogs killed because they couldn't decide who gets what pup. Story 33. This happened to an attorney at the law firm I work for. Husband and wife fighting for custody of 2 children after bitter, ugly divorce. Wife made an account in the husband's name on Ashley Madison to try and show his infidelity in a way that could be presented in court. Husband responded by putting some kind of pesticide in all of the wife's shampoos and conditioners, causing her hair to thin and fall out like she had been picking it. Wife and her new lover, the youth pastor at their church, claim husband had molested a girl at their church, and the girl had told the youth pastor. Husband convinced one of their kids to say the mom had been starving the kids as punishment. Wife has youth pastor light husband's car on fire. Last but not least, the original cause for the divorce, husband a prostitute. Caught chlamydia, gave it to wife. Wife got custody in the end, and husband moved to Central America. Story 34 Client's spouse of decades gets a terminal cancer diagnosis about halfway into a fairly routine medium-high asset divorce. My client is such a viciously horrible person, saying they were glad that the spouse was dying, that the opposing party's literal dying wish is to be divorced and never see his spouse of 30 years again. Story 35 My sister traded custody of her kids in exchange for a new car. Later on, she decided she wanted just the 2 girls to come live with her. She didn't want a boy. He asked why he couldn't come too. She said, I don't want you. I don't love you. He went on to become a drug addict, but cleaned himself up. I have not spoken to my sister in 25 years. Story 36. It wasn't my case, but I was waiting in the courtroom and heard a divorce hearing. The parties were having trouble reaching a full settlement agreement. The problem, they couldn't agree on custody, but not in the usual way. Each one of these self-absorbed adults couldn't seem to fit the 4-year-old kid into their schedule. I work Fridays, Your Honor, so I can't take him. Yeah, Fridays aren't good for me either. In fact, I'm usually on call all weekend, me too, but I have to miss Tuesdays in order to take him already, so she should have to take Fridays off. Broke my heart. Story 37 Family law is depressing. Worst I've seen is still ongoing. Dad files emergency petitions every time a new court order is about to be signed because he didn't agree to the terms his own lawyer set per his wishes. Mom withholds the child for visitation in contempt of court if the dad's wife is present at the exchange. As in, she'll pull into the parking lot, and if she sees anyone besides the dad, she peels out. Both have filed restraining orders against the other, which they later rescinded. Their last court order was 18 pages long, typically 2 to 3 at most for custody orders, because it is nauseatingly specific about each aspect of their interactions. God help me if I get dragged back into the middle of their case again. I'm not sure that this really counts. But during my custody case, my biological mother failed drug tests several times. When asked by the judge why she tested positive for meth, she said my father hired Chinese drug ninjas to swap out her test results. Took 3 years after that, but my dad finally got custody of me. Story 38 In my divorce, I gave my ex everything of value and moved in with a friend. During the year-long divorce, I rescued a puppy. On the last trip to mediation with the lawyers, she tells me she wants the dog. My lawyer shook his head and said that's not going to happen, and she immediately got up and left. On the last court day, she didn't even show up, so the judge told me I could have whatever I wanted. I kept the dog and never spoke to her again. Story 39 Family law attorney here, aka glorified babysitter. Let's see, one client said that father's visitation should be limited because his girlfriend's shirts are too low cut. Another client was ordered to box up his wife's belongings and some of the child's belongings and hand it over to her. She had him arrested and moved out. When I followed up with him, he said all went smoothly. Did as the judge directed. When we get to court, opposing counsel informs the judge with color photographs that he boxed up garbage, literally took garbage and has stuffed each box with it. When I asked why he did that, he said my wife only owned garbage. That's what she left behind. Same client, who was actually the worst client I ever had, once threatened to call Child Protective Services and alleged that the mother was neglecting and mistreating their daughter. The problem was that there was a full stay-away criminal court order of protection against him in favor of the mom and child. I told him that if CPS deems that to be true, his daughter might end up with the state. His response then, so be it, let her go to foster care. Same guy used to whisper drop dead every time his wife walked by us in court. Story 40, a client having a complete meltdown over not understanding that first and third Saturdays of each month that she insisted on is not the same as every other Saturday, since sometimes there are 5 Saturdays in a month amounting to a 2-day-a-year visitation difference. She was also very upset that her baby daddy left her for a white woman.